Excellent. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the community meeting about the development of our capital plan for Wallingford-Swarthmore School District. I'm the new superintendent, Russell Johnston. It is my third day on the job, and really a pleasure to be before you tonight about this very important topic. Anybody listening at home is equally welcome as we really delve into this important topic about what will we do with our facilities over the next 10 years? How do we want them to evolve? What will the cost be, which is such an important factor? And what will the end result be? So tonight, I think of this as sort of a layering on effect. And even though this is only my third day on the job, I've been watching this very closely for many months during the application process and even when I was onboarding. So while it may seem like who's this guy up here talking about something like he knows about it on his third day, I actually do feel like I know about it because of the great work that Jim Scanlon and others have done to really guide us through this process and the great partnership that we've had with ICS. To really lay out information. And really importantly tonight, we look forward to hearing your voices and hearing your questions so that we can make sure that we are continuing to fine tune and improve this plan. Our goal is to bring it before the school board. There'll be an update at the facilities and finances meetings next week. And then hopefully later this spring, a vote of the board. We'd love to see an approval of a capital plan so that we can move forward, so that we can begin really putting our stake in the ground, putting our one foot in front of the other, about what will change for our students as the result of the improvements that we can make to our buildings and our infrastructure. So I'm really pleased now to turn over the microphone to Phil Solomon and Tim Geider from ICS, partners that you've seen before us before. They were here in April. And I do think about this as a continual layering on. And so, this is like when you watch a TV show and there's a little bit of a recap of what happened in the last episode and then some new information in this episode. That's what will happen tonight. Bill and Tim will guide us through some of what some of you may have heard before, but if you didn't tune in April, they'll bring you back up to speed. And then they'll advance with more information tonight. And really, very importantly, after their presentation, as they share more information with you, we truly want to hear your questions tonight. It will make this plan stronger because of the way that the microphone works and our friends watching through the live stream. Either Phil, Tim, or myself will repeat the question. So if you ask the question, we're going to repeat it so that those watching at home can hear it. And we'll just make sure we provide as many answers as we can tonight. But sometimes questions are a good source of feedback, frankly, for us to delve into further and get those answers and bring them to the finance and facilities meetings next week. So with that, Phil, Tim, happy to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. We're also going to have another community survey. For those of you that attended before, there was a thought exchange. So if you don't have your question tonight, you can also just input it later. So thank you for having us back. This is community event number 2. The first one was really process oriented. This one is kind of data heavy. So we'll have a lot of kind of data to share with you. It's not the plan. It's a step on the way to building a plan. So it's really a lot about data. So with that, I have with me Tim Geider. I'm Phil Solomon. Here is our agenda. So a couple things. We're going to go back through kind of the purpose and just a couple of the key steps that Dr. Johnson was talking about. Go through the data, get to kind of the building maintenance cost estimates, and then have plenty of time for question and answer. And then at the very end, we still have a survey that you can put more thoughts in again. So just a little reminder of the purpose of this. So it's obviously to collaboratively develop a long-range facilities plan. And the number one thing is that it's aligned with kind of your strategic plan focus area pathway 5, which is infrastructure and finance. We're going to use the best practices as we're building it. And you can see the other bullets, but ultimately what we're looking to do is have a financially viable plan that's aligned with the district priorities and educational vision, actionable over a year-on-year approach, balancing the many competing interests of the district. So there's always competing interests for funds in the school district. So you're always balancing those priorities. So here are just some best practices, and we have them broken up into kind of 2 segments. We'll say the information gathering segment, that's this side, and then the decision-making segment. So we're kind of through that information gathering where we've talked about the process and the process we're going to use. We've gotten a lot of stakeholder engagement, principal feedback, the people who work on the buildings, et cetera. We've done our assessments, so we know what's in all the buildings and the subsystems, and we're going to snapshot a lot of that for you tonight so that you can kind of see it in a visual form as well as kind of a technical form as well. We're kind of moving into this second piece, which is decision making, and that's That's kind of an iterative process between developing options and then looking at funding and then finding kind of the sweet spot that makes the most sense. And then finally, you have plan implementation after something's adopted. You start with design and, so it's a process that moves forward. So a little bit of feedback. We did have an open house one. And so we did a thought exchange survey from there. We asked three key questions. What was the most important thing that you learned? What questions do you have about the planning process and what advice do you have? So the software thought exchange kind of builds it into three camps. It's kind of like, what are some commonalities identified on kind of one issue? What are on a different issue? And then what's common among all of them? So if you look at some of the feedback we got, there's like a side A, which is, hey, it's too early to really know that much. So we're worried that we don't have enough information to really drive anything. And then the other side was, hey, we really like the data-driven process that you're talking about. Everybody could agree that it was very important to have a comprehensive plan, comprehensive approach, and that using data actually helps you quite a bit. So the second question is, what questions do you have? And some people focused on, making sure that this information is transparent. Others were, hey, let's make sure that there's enough community engagement. Everybody could agree that informed decision-making was going to be important. And just so you know, all of these slides are going to be available online, so you can read the extra print that I'm not reading right now. And then the final piece is, what advice do you have for the school district? So again, there was a side that says, hey, we want to make sure that all of this is aligned with the district's educational strategy. There was another part that said, we want to make sure it's aligned with the community engagement. Everybody said, let's just make sure what you're doing is transparent. So just a little feedback, and we have more data than just that. Those are just snapshot slides. So just a little bit about the process. So again, we're going to use a data-driven collaborative process as we move along. So a lot of that comes with the district has been doing this for multiple years. So it's gathering everything that's been done to date. So let's make sure we understand all of that. Then it's going through and assessing the district with our teams of engineers and architects and such, just to get a fresh snapshot of that. And then we try to compile it. When we compile it, we're trying to pull it into actionable data where you can visually put something on one page if possible, because I feel like it's about as much as you can retain in your brain at one time so that it can help you kind of like decision making. So just a quick snapshot. There's a lot more data that was evaluated in this, but this is just a smattering of information that's been gathered through the multiple year process that we're looking at. In addition to that, as we said, we're doing a lot of surveying. So we're talking to principals and HVAC staff and cafeterias, like the people who use the building the most, to make sure that we're getting their feedback on what priorities should be. And so we just identified some of the high level priorities that came out of some of the principal interviews that we did. So we sat down and we went through a lot of information with each building's principal to talk about how the building's used and utilized and what's most important to them. So one of the things we do early is we just look at energy. And these bars are kind of counterintuitive because it's energy used per square foot. So in this case, the smaller bars are better. So you can see that, it's built, Stroup Middle School is very efficient. And you can see that it is a geothermal system, which is kind of a renewable system that you can use that helps drive the energy down. Some of your other buildings are still better than 75% of the buildings out there, schools. So they're benchmarking very well. But then you have the high school, which is due for renovation. And that makes sense that it's using more energy than a majority of its peers, if you will. So just a little snapshot about energy use. That's one of the things that we use to help drive decision makers, but not the thing. Tim's going to talk a little bit about capacity. I know these are a little bit of an eye chart, but they help think about how well utilized the building is.
All right, thanks, Phil. So our team was able to work with the principals and the administration to complete a building by building capacity analysis, really looking at how many students can be supported by that building. The analysis is shown here, and I'll kind of walk through an example. We'll start with the high school here. Let's see if this works. So on the left-hand side, we've got Strathaven High School that's serving grades 9 through 12. And the existing capacity, 2024-2025 capacity is 1402. Again, that's based on how you're using the building today, all the different instructional spaces, classrooms, music rooms, science labs. And they're all applied a certain class size. So, 23 to 27 is kind of the general range per class that the district is shooting for. So 1402 is the current capacity. The current enrollment is 1185. And that shows an 85% utilization rate. And that's again today. Also, the district updated a demographic analysis, which is making projections over the next 5 and 10 years of what student enrollment looks like. With that in mind, at a high school level, the target utilization is about 80%. Secondary is 80 to 85%. Typically, elementary school level is a 90% target, just to allow flexibility with how you instruct students and to absorb bubbles as needed through the demographics that attend the building. With that, the target capacity for the high school would be 1122. And projected enrollment in 2029, 2030 is 1244, which would end up with about 89% utilization. That's all projected levels in the 29, 30, assuming that you're still providing education the same way that you are today, using the current classrooms the way that they're used. Working down this column on the right-hand side, you can see that really it's the high school and Wallingford Elementary that exceed the target utilization rate. Yeah. Yeah, so that's why we have a note at the bottom excluding modular classrooms. And it's exactly for that reason, because modular classrooms are really supposed to be temporary, not end up into permanent classroom space. Did you have a question too? Yeah, 1244. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So the question was, again, with a 1402 capacity of the building and projected enrollment of 1244, you are under 100% utilized, right? But again, that 80% is, we've got this note at the bottom, secondary schools, typically 80 to 85%, high school closer to 80% is a target. So 89 would not really be where you want to operate the building. Plus, it wouldn't allow for growth with special education and the life skills program, some of the other educational priorities that we heard from the principals. So that's what goes into this utilization. And again, that's kind of getting into the planning phase. This is really just current data, and the enrollment data that we're looking at is what we're showing here. We have another question. Yeah. Yeah, it's good. It's a great question. Again, there's a footnote at the bottom. The Pennsylvania Economy League was hired by the district, and they completed a demographic analysis in 2022, and then they updated it just recently this month. So all this data is per the Pennsylvania Economy League demographic analysis. Yeah, I mean, they have a whole process where they look at live birth data, and they look at historical information over the last 10 years, and then they project out. They also look at any housing data development that might be going on in the district, and then they put their projections out over the next 10 years using all that data.
Sure. So the the target utilization. So when you see the full capacity of 1402, that would be if every seat in the whole building was sat in and all periods of time, which is virtually impossible to do because these kids are taking different classes. And it would be if the kids came in perfect packages of 23, 24, 25, depending on the class size that could hold. So that's like ultimate maximum capacity, which is why they have rules of thumb for target utilization of different levels. So the high school, 80%, and these are numbers that have been developed over years and years of, public education. What's the right level for that to allow to program the building, offer classes, and have all that work effectively? Otherwise, you'd have this Rubik's Cube that could never be solved, right? So, and that's why at elementary school, it's a little higher. You can run that at about 90% because there you don't have as many different options. You have some specials and you have some other things. So you can run that tighter to kind of perfect utilization, whereas you can't do that in a middle school or a high school. So just a little, yep. Yeah, so that's a target class size. And Tim, I think you were getting at that. What was the?
Yeah, so generally, if you look at kindergarten, the class size target is 23. So half day K, it's a 46 student capacity is assigned to each one of those classrooms. And full day K, it's half that, right? Because you're all day. Going up to 27 students at higher grade levels. And then science labs are applied 20 students max. Again, these are target class sizes. So when you look at that 89%, if you blended all the rooms together, you're at roughly 89% of those class sizes is what you're operating at. That's right. The target sizes for classes.
An interesting way to think about that too is every class could be used at any given time of the day, but maybe it's not used to, maybe there's not 25 kids in that class. There's only 20 that sign up for that class or however it works. So that's why you always have these remainders that gets you to that kind of rule of thumb. They're not hard and fast rules of thumb, but over years, there are best practices how you program.
Okay, so we did the same exact analysis. Let me advance this here. With full day K. So we kind of skipped ahead a little bit. So the only adjustment here is the same classes. You're applying 23 students at the kindergarten level instead of 46 students in terms of capacity. So you could see at the elementary level, your capacities go from 600, 675, and 673 to 554, 629, and 627. So looking at the right-hand side, you've got the projected utilizations. Nothing changed for the high school or the middle school, but you're approaching that 90% at MPE, and SRS is approaching 90%, and then you're well over 100% at Wallingford. So basically what this chart says is that you would need additional space if you were to provide full day K. And this is, again, this is about as far as our analysis is going at this point. Next slide, Phil's going to talk about just the building portfolio a little bit.
Yeah, I usually use this slide just to remind people how many assets a school district has. So the way you can read this slide, if you will, is it's each building, it's the grades it serves, the square footage of the building, when it was constructed, when the last renovation of that building is. And I use this thing years since renovation because that helps you determine how much useful life is in certain systems. So when you look at that, there's a replacement value. And what that is if we were to take all the buildings and just, make them disappear today, and you had to rebuild them exactly as they are, how much would that cost? So that's what each one of these numbers is in the right-hand side. And it totals up to almost $400 million worth of assets. So when you think of that, that's a lot of assets to maintain. That's why these numbers get very big, very quick, is they each require maintenance. Some rules of thumb. I have APO, which is American Physical Plant Association. It's mostly for colleges, but they do some rules of thumb of how much money you need to invest in a facility to keep it in good working order. And their numbers are somewhere around 1.5% to 3% of that replacement value. National Academy of Sciences is a very large federal program that studied thousands of federal buildings. and they came up with 2 to 4% of replacement value as an average annual investment to keep buildings in good working order. I use that as a rule of thumb because it's a good way to check, are you, when you do a bottom-up analysis, does it kind of meet the Snell test, if you will? So I use a lot of rules of thumb just to make sure that the plan is reasonable. So this is a way to break the buildings down in kind of a simple chart form. So again, you have the buildings and then the number of years since a major renovation. And we consider a major renovation when you go in and you do all the systems behind the walls, typically, all the HVAC and electrical and plumbing, all those things that are very expensive that aren't seen as much. A lot of times a major renovation will leave out some discretionary things such as casework and things like that, but the systems are done. So that's a major renovation. When you look at the years of these buildings, you can see the high school has been about 25 years since a major renovation. And some good rules of thumb are about 20 years into the life cycle, you should start planning. At about 25, you should start doing. And it's not hard and fast, but that's a good rule of thumb to kind of keep the bigger plan in place. So then right behind it, you have SRS. It's at 21 years since this latest renovation. So you're in the kind of the planning, and soon you'll be into the doing. And then you can kind of see how the rest stack up. So when we start to break a building down to the technical components, there's a lot of subcomponents to each building. And if you kind of rate these and look at conditions of these, it helps you see kind of the age of each thing, because everything has got a different useful life. So we use some metrics from ASHRAE and BOMA, and these are people who study buildings all the time. They're associations, and they tell you that the average years for a terminal unit in a room is 20 years of useful life. Is that a hard and fast number? No, but it's a good number to plan around. 15 years for HVAC controls, 30 years for windows, 25 years for roofing. So you can see that we're using those as metrics to kind of rate everything. And that's in addition to us looking at it and giving it a condition assessment, because school districts have a great way of making systems live longer than the rated useful life. And almost every school district does because they have to, but that's good. It's good use of your money. When we take all of those systems, and I know this is a little bit of an eye chart, and we rate them all by useful life, you get a chart that's kind of this red, that red means the system's 5 years beyond its rated useful life. Orange, system at or beyond its useful life. Yellow, within 5 years of useful life, and green, system within useful life expectancy. So what we've done is we've put the useful life expectancy on this column. So for each system, primary heating system, in all buildings, there's these major boilers and major chillers, which provide hot water and chilled water that's cool and heat the building. So primary heating, primary cooling, air distribution, terminal equipment, HVAC controls, all these subsystems make up kind of the living systems of a building, in addition to some of the things such as FF&E as furniture, fixtures, and equipment. So that's a bucket for all the furniture and all of the equipment that we're using right now, et cetera. So this is a good way to snapshot all of those systems. This is a snapshot of today. So where are all the buildings today? And you can kind of see that makes sense. The high school has got the most red systems because it's, again, longest since its renovation. You can see that SRS next in line. You see there's a lot of yellow and orange and some red. So you know that coming up, that building is going to need investment as well. And then you can kind of see, then you get to NPE, which is the most recent renovation. You can see it's almost all green, and with maybe exception a couple yellows, which is in a good spot. When you roll 5 years from now, which we did, you can see if you did nothing, right? If you did nothing, you would have, a lot more red and a lot more red orange, and your map is kind of changing. So your systems are getting more and more, beyond their useful life, which typically means they're becoming a little more unreliable, more energy consuming, and have the potential for what we call catastrophic failure, means that it fails and you can't fix it. So that's always problematic to try to fix something in an emergency situation. It costs more, it's disruptive, all those kind of things, the things that you don't want as a school district. So these are kind of two visual ways to look at the buildings, and we'll come back to this as we roll through the program and build programs like that address this. So then as the district's investing money, you can see these maps change from red to green, et cetera. Tim, you're going to review kind of what the high school is, and then we're going to go through and sum all this up.
Great. Okay, so this section of the presentation is really going to do a deeper dive into each of the buildings themselves. So Phil, and we've been talking about some higher level kind of information here. We sat down with the principals and other administrators at the high school and really got a lot of good information around priorities in terms of the education, right? Removing modulars, replacing them with permanent classroom space, the addition of auxiliary gym, auditorium updates, renovation of the library. These are all wants and needs from the administrator's perspective. And then we coupled that with the building system priorities at the bottom, which is everything that Phil just went over, roofing, chillers, boilers, generator at the high school. So before we talk about options, what we were going to do is just provide a refresher on the concept plan that was put together actually June of last year. So almost a year ago. And just to get everybody level set on kind of this plan, and then we have additional options addressing some of those other priorities to consider for the district. This plan, basically, if you see this orange area, this replaces where those classroom modulars are currently. And then off on the right, on the left-hand side in green is the auxiliary gym. And then you can see these areas that are in color here. The pool area is being renovated in orange, and then yellow is the called library media center area. But what's not included in that plan that was presented last year is anything that's in white. So you have the whole 4-story classroom wing on the right. This is considered the second floor. We'll go through each floor by floor, but you can see on the right-hand side listed everything that's included in this concept plan, and then everything that's not included. And it's really addressing all the systems in that 4-story classroom wing. So we're going to have some options later that start with the base project, and then some options to address the systems that Phil was talking about earlier. Here's another view of the 3rd floor. So you can see the upper floor of that 2-story classroom addition to replace the modulars. And then some other areas in the building that get renovated. You get the fitness center and the robotics tech lab, but all the white space around it, including the auditorium and all these other spaces listed on the right, were not in the scope of work or in the budget that was presented last year. 1st floor, very little, right? You've got some storage under the auxiliary gym addition, and then again, 4-story classroom and wing, which on this floor is really the cafeteria. And the same as the 4th floor. So what we did with this information was we created options. I'm not expecting you to see everything here, right? Phil said you can poke on the website if you want. You can download this and look at all these line items. But ultimately, we created 3 options for consideration as a starting point for the district. So the all the way on the left-hand side, you've got this, what we're calling the base edition renovation option, which really is reflective of everything that you just saw in the previous 4 slides from the concept that was put together last year. And then everything in blue in here are basically alternates or add-ons to that program. So the base project addresses just over 97,000 square feet. So part of that is existing square footage and part of that is new square footage with the addition. A synthetic turf field allocation for that, and it's estimated at $67 million. The base plus project addresses just under 300,000 square feet. So it's got the addition square footage plus all the remaining square footage of the high school, because you're talking about addressing all those systems behind the walls like Phil had talked about earlier. That estimated cost is $116 million. And then there's an extended project that adds additional infrastructure needs and some updates to the auditorium and the cafeteria and other interior finishes. And that estimated cost is $138 million. Again, these are starting points to what could be a plan that's decided on later. Yes. I mean, it's a good question. I can't answer the reason why the robotics lab was, again, that was part of the plan that was put together last year and presented to the board. What I do know is that the main gym did get some updates along the years, and that's one of the reasons why that wasn't included in that plan. There are some renovations with the stairwell near it and outside it, but I don't know specifically what you're talking about with the main gym, or we didn't hear that in the discussions with the principal and the administrators at the high school either. Yep. Yep. Yeah. So first question, this program, again, there's added classroom space, but then there's also added special education space, which doesn't get capacity to it, but it's additional space for life skills and those programs. This would bring the high school at just about 80% utilization, which is that target that you're looking for, right? And that's, again, with the modulars gone, replacing them with for the base project, right? And then the other options here are the base project plus. It's not like we're removing anything from one, at least in this illustration here. The answer to your second question is nothing's been decided on. This is all part of this decision-making process that we're really entering into. We've just wrapped up the data gathering process. We've looked at all the previous studies and all the previous reports, done our own assessments, put this together as a starting point, and then we're going to work with the administration and the board to prioritize and then look at what can be funded as well, right? That's an important step here. Oh, okay. Yep. I think you go from 8 classrooms to 12 classrooms in that area, but yeah. Yeah, with some special education space as well. Yeah, and it's about 44,000 square feet, give or take. If you want to do a little bit of math, it's basically it's that projected enrollment number divided by 80%. That's roughly what your capacity ends up being. So we had a projected enrollment, I think it was like 1244, right? So yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so it's the 1244, which was the projected enrollment, which is on this slide, if you recall. I'm gonna skip back here. 1244 right here on the right hand side. And I'm saying about 80%, but it's somewhere 79, 80-ish percent. But if it's 80% exactly, that's 1555 is what that capacity would be. And I'm gonna total capacity 1402, 1555. Yep. Yep.
Even though we're not gonna make you do them.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead. The pool area and the locker rooms are getting renovated. They're in the budget. I think it's about 5.5 million for that. It's a good chunk of change. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I don't know, I'm getting is there something? Oh, I'm sorry, okay. Asking to repeat the question. Yep. Yep. And yep. Yeah. Yeah. So I'll just capture that in. Yeah.
100%. And that could have, that could have been an overestimation or whatever, but you do also have to think of some of the things that are not captured in here is special education is handled a little bit different in the utilization function. So that excess space could be getting utilized and it'd be hard to capture it because the current modern education is a lot more individualized and there's a lot more support for individual students. So it doesn't pan out 100% in some of the utilization numbers. So I'd have to dig a little deeper just to make sure that I'm not saying something that's, unfair to like the planners or what have that came well before us.
Okay, shifting gears to SRS, Swarthmore Rutledge School. So these are the educational priorities again, and building system priorities that we heard from, speaking with the principal and also our assessment. You can see them all here, but this is largely, SRS is largely building system focused in terms of the needs. So you're talking about HVAC, you're talking about, roofing, ADA, security upgrades. There hasn't been a major renovation there in quite some time. So some things aren't up to current codes. So less on the educational needs and more focused on the building system. So the two options that we put together, again, these are just considered options at this point. But the one is really, we're calling it a targeted or HVAC focused component replacement project. So this is basically doing a complete HVAC renovation, electrical that goes along with the HVAC, plus some, updates to the fire alarm system and some other electrical pieces of equipment. And you can see here roofing replacement, some other areas here. So this is, but really it's focused on that HVAC project and then some other ancillary systems. That project is estimated at $28 million at this point. And we have another option, which is we're calling it an extended because it's everything that was in the previous option. But then also we're considering this one more of a major renovation. So it's bringing all the systems that aren't up to current code, addressing more on the finishes and secure vestibule, et cetera, some of these other areas that of need in the building. This project is estimated at $39 million. And there is the cost needed here for some temporary classroom space because this is more of an intrusive renovation where it would be an occupied renovation as part of the project. So there's a cost to that as well for rentals, right? Setup and rental of the mod. And then Phil's going to talk about the remaining three buildings, which are more in the maintenance mode. You know, where we've worked from the high school, which has the most need, to SRS. And then we're working down to the other buildings.
Yeah, so these buildings have had more recent, renovations. So, as Tim said, they are more in the maintenance mode. And you can see the ages again. Last renovation, 2008, 11, and 13. There are some priorities that we've identified from working with staff. So we wanted to make sure that those were in the system replacements, et cetera. When you break these down and look over a 10-year period, you're looking at maintenance per year, right? So you're looking at different things that need to be done over a 10-year period. And over 10 years is about half of the system usable life. So, the numbers kind of add up quickly, but you can see for the middle school, there's about $24.5 million worth of need. NPE 11.4 and West about 10.9. And these will be broken down into projects later, but this is just a need right now on an annual basis. No, I'm sorry, not annual, total. So, yeah, sorry, not annual. Sorry, everybody, I saw everybody's have a heart attack and I realized I misspoke. Yeah, so then you break that need up over 10 years and you could do simple math and divide it or break it into project. We also looked at what we're considering kind of the bare minimum, which is, we consider that like warm, safe, dry. So it's not like a lot of cabinetry or discretionary information. It's just HVAC, roofing, windows, things that you absolutely need to keep kids warm, safe, and dry. So you can strip out a little bit of the discretionary need from there. And you can see if you do that, you're at about 20.4 million at the middle school, 7.7 in NPE, and 6.3 at West, again, over the next 10 years. So we also, oops, I'm sorry, go ahead. Yep. A building. Now I got to repeat that question. This is where I've been falling short every time. So the question, and let me make sure I rephrase it correctly, is at West, it was a little short in utilization. So it was at 91% utilization in the future. Why wouldn't we be considering building additional space for that? It's a good question. So those are rules of thumb. Doesn't mean you can't operate a building at 91%, but for planning purposes, you usually try that 90%. So what you don't do typically is if there is a bubble, you don't build for a bubble. That's why you have that utilization of 90%. And what we're seeing, and we're going to continue to validate this because this project isn't for quite a few years, but what we're seeing in the enrollment data is a flattening. So it was going up very fast for several years, maybe 5 years, where the district was gaining students relatively quickly. The first projection tended to project that out. And what has happened is it's really kind of flattened off. Now, all these things are, subject to review every year. There are some limiting factors within the community. There's not a lot of space to build new buildings. So as you graduate kids out, what's happening is it appears, and I am not the demographer. So what appears to be happening is as you're graduating them out, you're still turning houses over to younger families because it's a very sought after school district for people with children. So clearly there's housing turnover. We call that churn, which is keeping your enrollment projection high, but flat because there's not a lot of, you don't see a Toll Brothers community coming in here anytime soon, and I don't think the community wants that, to be honest. So you're seeing a flattening. Now, that being said, the district is constantly updating their demographic and enrollment projections so that when you get to this point, if that 91 is 94 or something like that, you probably need to make a different decision. So you probably need to build for that. Don't have to make that decision today, but it's a keen eye that saw that we're looking to solve for space at the high school level, and we're not quite looking to solve for space here yet. The high school level, think about it, we're closer to that decision too, because that's the next one on the list. And if we have the best information that we're going to have before you make that decision. So, you know, there is a little bit of iterative process to this. And the planning, as much as I'd love it to be, cannot be perfect because things are changing. So you use the best practices and the rules of thumb to make the best decisions you can. And then you adjust along. Sure. Yeah, a lot of kids at Halloween, huh? It's a great observation. Yeah. Yeah. And that's true, right? Because like the community, although kind of a small community, is geographically large. So maybe your area is an area where a lot of the houses turned over and a lot of the, you know, people downsized or what have you, and young families moved in, where maybe other areas, the families are staying longer. So those new kids aren't coming. So I mean, I don't know. We're gonna have the demographic people come and explain a little bit more as they finalize all of their reports. And again, it's also going to have to be looked at every year and just make sure that there's nothing changing, because it can happen. You know, it can happen that communities can change. Good question, though. Very good. So we did an initial look at full day K just to see about space. So one of the things we were looking at is, could you house full day K with the space that you have? So we just kind of solved for that. And the answer was no. You would be over capacity at all of your elementary schools. So if you wanted to implement full day K from where we're sitting today, you would have to have additions to the buildings to absorb that. And that is just the space. There's a much bigger decision to be made because the operational costs of running full day K are much more than the space costs. And there's a lot more change in program and everything else. So we were just kind of on one aspect of this, and that's the space thing. And that's still TBD as well. I think if the full day kindergarten is going to be a consideration, that's a whole nother work stream, if you will, to kind of work through that, especially given all the numbers you're about to see as well. So long story short, with what you have today, unless the enrollment drops significantly, you could not offer full day K without that space. So this is an eye chart, but this is the one that everybody is probably interested in. So all those numbers we kind of put together on one chart. This isn't a plan. This isn't even options of a plan. It's just all the data put together into each building and kind of some different approaches that you could take. So when Tim was talking about the high school base, the only reason we called it base is because that's what was developed prior to us getting involved. There was a project that was developed to replace the modulars and solve some other needs. We called that base because that's what we had for existing information. Doesn't mean that's what the board has agreed on or invested in or has agreed to or anything like that. It's just what we are calling them. From this, we're going to get something. So if you were to do that program as, you know, thought of prior, you would still have a bunch of those systems we talked about that need to be addressed and all that white space Tim was talking about. So, you know, you would have to do this. This is not in addition, this would be in total. So in total, that would be 101 to do the base plus all the warm, safe, dry stuff. There was other needs at the high school, you know, with some of the areas of the cafeteria, just some other areas that needed updating. Those are addressed in kind of this base plus, and then there was additional items that were looked at and as needs as well. Now, wants and needs is always tricky. So that's for the board to decide. That's for the board and the administration to decide. But we kind of chunked it out into pieces so that there would at least be some options, some levels, and all levels in between also exist. Same thing with SRS. We have kind of this warm, safe, dry number. We only did 2 numbers for that. So you can see that there's just 2 different numbers. The middle school, same thing, 2 different numbers, kind of the warm, safe, dry. And we kind of did that for every build. Athletics, also, there's a lot of different options to be looked at and reviewed for athletics. There's limited space here. So there's different ways to approach athletics. And in this base number was about $3 million worth of a turf field. And that could be pulled out depending on how we want to do decision making at the board level. But then there was additional items that were looked at in this athletic feasibility study that we kind of included in this base plus. And then there's even more in the extended program. So there's all kinds of decisions to be made there. These are not options. These are just taking what was out of that athletics feasibility report and just kind of putting them in somewhere so they're captured. Our first pass at full day K of adding the additional space is about $10 million. And that would be probably at a single building because a lot of your buildings cannot be expanded for municipal authority reasons. So if you were to do that, there probably would have to be a redistricting, which is not a great word in any district. So that's to be determined in a different work stream. And there's a lot of pros and cons that you've got to weigh and something like that. There's a bunch of notes down here, but I kind of walked through those. But with that, I know it's a lot of information, but we'd be happy to answer questions about this. And remember, not the plan, just the data. Now, the board has got the difficult decision of turning this from data into the plan. Yes. So I think that's going to be addressed. Yes, I'm sorry. So, yeah, the question is, in the base program, the 67 million that's listed, did the district already have money kind of going towards that or put aside for that? The answer is there has been money put towards the capital plan. I think that's going to be better addressed at the finance committee where they talk about that. And I'm certainly not an expert in the school's budget, but I do know that the district's been planning to do this project. So they've been what I call creating space in the budget to handle some of this without a giant impact all in one year. So that's always good planning when you come into a district and you're doing this and they were already financially preparing themselves. The exact numbers I don't have, but I'm sure somebody will. Please. That is a great question. So the question is, does the plan include the extra personnel? The way I understand the plan, remember, we'll talk about the high school plan first. So those programs exist, many of them. They just exist in temporary classrooms. So, okay, I'm sorry. I don't know. Yeah, so if there is additional personnel, and I believe there is, and this might be a better question for the district, there is some contemplation of additional special needs programs in that building. So that staff may or life skills program. Yes. Yeah. No, they do not. Yeah, this is all just capital needs. Any of that other stuff will be in the facilities plan on the operations side, which they have also been preparing for. So there is money that's been put aside for more preventative maintenance and operational programs, summer programs, etc. Yes. I will repeat. Great question. Yeah. So the question is, when you start doing any work or renovating anything, anyone who's renovated their house understands that there's these things that were not thought of or that you thought were good that weren't, are there contingencies in this program? The answer is yes. So we build what's called design contingency. That's like exactly what you're saying. Well, we open the ceiling and we recognize that the piping we thought goes through a beam, whatever it is, and you need to solve for that. So there's a good amount of money. I believe we have a 10% design contingency for renovation work, which is a good rule of thumb. So that helps you with all of those. Then on the build side, same thing. As you're building something, there's always contingencies that come up, and those turn into change orders, which are usually a nasty word in the construction industry, but they happen. So there's also a 5% contingency in those. So we built it in such a way that it's a reasonable cost estimate, including all of those things. Yes. Great.
Yeah, and I think that what's been helpful about this process is to have these community meetings and to layer on information and to get feedback to take to the board. So next week we'll have our facilities meeting and our finance meeting back to back to present more of this information to the board. And what we anticipate and what we hope to have happen is that this spring, even before the school year ends, May, June, to propose to the board, to recommend to the board a plan to vote upon, because you saw the options that our ICS colleagues laid out tonight. It'll be incumbent upon me as the superintendent to make a recommendation to the board to say, based on all the information that we have, we are now ready to propose to you what we'd like to have you consider. And then the board, of course, will take the recommendation under consideration. And, I'm sure poke at it, think about it more and decide where do we want to land. And I think what's really important about next week's facilities and finance meeting is that we'll go over a lot of what you heard tonight directly with the board members who are on the facilities committee, adding on any additional information that we have available for that meeting. And then that's immediately followed by the finance meeting where Ms. Mosley will be able to share more information about how would we fund this, given the options that we have. And I think it's really important that we'll be able to bring both pieces of information together in a very timely way, which I know will then better inform the board and make I hope, a very responsible decision. Like I said, later this spring, hopefully by June, but it could be even July. So if you'll allow me to say spring, summer, I like to talk in seasons until I know exact dates. So let's say spring, early summer is when we would hope to be able to continue to move forward, because I think that once we make a decision, then we can really start working towards changing the facilities we want to for our children. Please. Sure. So it is these Wednesday, the 16th. 14th. Sorry, without my okay, the 14th. 6 o'clock. Thanks, Bob. Great. And yes, public participation as always. Great, please. Rhoda. We agree that we need to be very prudent and responsible about how we take on additional debt to pay for this, to fund this. And that's why I'm really glad that Ms. Mosley will have more information that by design in the same evening to go back over what are the possibilities and then how would we responsibly fund them. And we did a planning meeting earlier today with all of the parties that you see here from facilities and budget, as well as our ICS partners, to map that out for what we can bring to the board. So there can be that information that's shared very publicly about how would we take on the debt to fund this in a responsible way. So look forward to sharing that information. Saw him back there. I think, no? All right. Glad to have him. Any other thoughts or questions this evening? Thank you very much for coming out tonight. We do, of course, the encore.
I'm sorry. Yeah, no.
After questions there.
Yeah, after questions. So just so you know, just as we had a thought exchange prior, if you do have things that come up in between now and, the next meeting, the same questions we have in a new thought exchange. So, what is something important that you've learned this evening? What questions do you have about the planning process and what advice do you have? So at any time, if you want to just QR code that those three questions come up, you can write as much as you want. And what happens is the AI summary kind of starts to summarize that into key considerations from the public. This is also going to be open for, I believe, 2 weeks. So anybody who's watching it live stream or anybody who watches it asynchronous, that's the new term, and they want to have input, they can actually do that. And then we'll pull that together for the board so that we can get the best feel that we can from the community. So encourage anyone to watch this and provide some feedback if possible. So that was the last slide.